Hey, yes! Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to a special holiday episode of the Keep It Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast, the best fantasy hockey podcast in the world, hosted by two guys who at one point owned Erik Karlsson in their keeper pools. I'm your host, Elon Dubrowski. With me, as always, Brian Calm.
Hello, Elon. Hello, everybody. A special holiday episode, only in that it happens right after the holidays. It's Boxing Day in Canada. Hope everybody won their boxing matches today. But we have some great fantasy hockey news to get to, even with the recent lull.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that matters when I say it's a holiday episode, we're not actually going to do anything holiday-like except for only have 5 days to report on instead of 7 for games. There's no games on tonight. What a bummer. We're trying to do a fantasy hockey podcast here. Usually I have so much fun watching the scores come in and see how we're already getting things wrong. But here, nothing that I wrote this morning has changed. I know all of our data will be correct. And by the way, Brian, before we move forward, a place where you always find correct data is DobberHockey.com. They are the best fantasy hockey website out there. No question. You go to their player profiles, you can just see all the data you want about a player, their current line mates, their stats from the last few games, their advanced stats, everything you need. You've got daily ramblings, you've got starting goalies and line combinations. You can see the line combinations during the game, which is very important to me. I actually noticed that Rickard Rakell was moved off of the top line for a bit in the last game, and I was a little bit concerned. But anyway, let's not go down that road. DobberHockey.com, it's great.
And especially now with the World Juniors happening, you're wondering, who is this guy? Who's that guy? Dobber Prospects has all the info to answer those kinds of questions for you. You better believe there'll be some good content there throughout the tournament. So DobberHockey.com for your big league fantasy news and Dobber Prospects for your future fantasy news.
Yeah, and definitely if you're interested in prospects and you haven't gone back and checked it out, I did an interview last week with Cam Robinson, a writer for Dobber Hockey that writes about prospects. Or I guess he doesn't write about prospects. I don't know. He writes about a bunch of things. But anyways, it was a really fun interview, and he talked about some of the players that you'll be seeing at these World Junior Championships. We're not going to be talking about that today. We're talking about the big boys. We're going to be talking about everything that happened in the past week in fantasy hockey. And let's start with the first fantasy hockey headline of the week, which is, of course, injuries. In fact, 2 big goalie injuries happened in the same game, which were good. No, which were obviously not great for the teams involved, though one of them maybe. Let's start with Tampa Bay and Ben Bishop. He's expected to miss 3 to 4 weeks with a lower body injury. Kristers Gudlevskis has been called up, but obviously the net will now belong to Andrei Vasilevsky while Bishop is out. And you know what? I'm saying it might not be that bad because Bishop has not been that great. Like, I'd imagine Bishop owners in fantasy, they kind of get some relief from a really disappointing season so far. He has only a .907 save percentage, only 9 wins in 22 games played. Now you could stash him in your IR, maybe ride some goalie off a free agency that you've been interested in trying out, but you didn't have room for him. You couldn't justify dropping Bishop. Now's your chance to stash Bishop for a bit. We'll see what happens on the Lightning, though, because Vasilevsky hasn't been that great lately either. Like, he started really hot, but he's been so weak lately as well. He has an .876 save percentage over the last month. That's 8 games. Last 8 games, .876 save percentage. Just brutal. Only 2 wins in that span. In fact, he got pulled after letting in 4 goals on Friday, and Gudlevskis played the last half of the third period and made 3 saves, no goals against. So a 100% save percentage. Not too bad, but obviously only 3 saves. So common sense says that Vasilevsky is a must-add if he's available in your league, but at the same time, how valuable is a sub-900 save percentage goalie on a struggling Lightning team who's currently missing their top 2 scorers in Stamkos and Kucherov?
Yeah, this is actually good news, I think, for Bishop owners. You've sort of framed it as maybe for Tampa, but for people who own Ben Bishop in their fantasy leagues, now you can stash him away on IR and maybe hope to do something a little more useful with his roster spot, because he has not been helping you a whole lot and not even been starting every game that you might have hoped he would have started. Something is weird on the whole in Tampa, and we've touched on it before this year. They're a bottom half team in score-adjusted shot attempts for percentage, when last year they were just outside the top 5, and that's what's commonly referred to as the possession battle driving play. They're on the wrong side of it this year. Their scoring has been inconsistent. Their goaltending has been inconsistent. Both goalies have really let them down. Tampa's even strength expected goals against should suggest that they'll give up, fewer goals than 2/3 of the league, but they've actually given up the 13th most goals against per game at even strength. They're bottom 10 in save percentage, which contributes to that. Last year, they were top 10 in save percentage. So a lot of different things happening in Tampa. And that all means that owning the Tampa goalie is not the primo ticket to wins and goalie categories that it was last year. From this point forward, Vasilevsky has to be the guy, both right now and, going forward into post-Bishop times. This is a good opportunity for him if he can step in and play consistently well in the absence of Bishop and give the Lightning no reason to go back to Bishop getting 2 out of 3 and say, hey, Andre, you're going to get 2 out of 3 from this point on. So that would be a point of nervousness for Bishop owners. But like you were saying, Elon, his goaltending has not been very strong. We'll see. I feel like some teams that were struggling, and we're going to get to one in particular later in the show, some teams that were struggling going into the break, feel like this 3-day rest could have brought some nice things. Maybe that'll apply to the Tampa Bay goalies and defense, although there are definitely bigger issues at play. And Elon, you mentioned, also hampered on top of those issues by losing so many star players to injury.
Yeah, I said that Stamkos and Kucherov are out. Also, Druin got injured in Friday's game. We don't know if he'll be out for a while, but he had been doing so well, so that would be a real bummer if he's out long-term. Palat is still out. Callahan, Nemesnikov, Paquette, all out as well. I'm looking at their lines from the last game, and Druin was still there, but guys getting power play time included Richard Tanner, or is it Tanner Richard? I don't know, but people I've never even heard of. I feel like there's some people, maybe like Alex Killorn, who was good at one point at the beginning of the year, and then we sort of have forgotten about him like we do every year. Maybe he's going to get an increased role. Who knows, though, if they'll be able to score enough goals to make him fantasy relevant. Like we talked about Corey Conacher. I think he got sent down, actually, and then Brian Boyle, Braden Point. It is not good right now to own Tampa Bay players. Hedman has obviously been amazing. But anyway, so Brian, you said that obviously you have to ride Vasilevsky now. Is Tampa Bay going to ride him? Is there any chance that if he keeps on playing as badly as he's been doing, that Tampa would go to Gudlevsky's? Can you give a quick sense of who is that guy? And is there any chance that he could get some games in? And maybe does he have any value in a deep league?
I should have come prepared with this information. There was a guy, and I'm trying to remember, they had 2 goalie prospects. One was Gudlevskis, and the other was somebody with a similarly complicated name. But Gudlevskis had an amazing game against Team Canada in some tournament sometime.
Okay.
Right?
I don't know.
The Latvian goalie? Yeah. Okay. No, Christos Gudlevskis is not going to take any significant starts. No, I don't think Gudlevskis is going to take any significant starts away from Vasilevsky. Maybe 1 out of every 4 if Vasilevsky is playing subpar, but they don't have anything better in Gudlevskis. He's been essentially a career minor leaguer, and in his cups of coffee in the NHL, he's never A, gotten playing time, or B, done a whole lot, although I guess he is a .959 save percentage guy in 3 NHL appearances. However, I don't think that's indicative of his long-term value. I see this as a really good chance for Tampa to have Vasilevsky in there, write out whatever problems they have with him in the net, and then start to see what their team could look like in future years without Bishop.
Yeah, well, in my interview with Cam, he was talking about Vasilevsky as one of the top goalies you want in one of these deep prospect leagues, or I guess he's not in a prospect league. What do you call it? It's a dynasty league where you draft players that you're expecting to play well in 3 years from now. He said that it was Matt Murray #1 and then Vasilevsky #2, basically, for goalies that you'd want right now. So we'll have to see if he can ride this out and maybe get better. Like I said, an .876 save percentage over the past month. So you're right. Obviously, it should be his net, but if he keeps struggling like that, maybe you could grab Gudlevsky's for a spot start and then see how he does. But I agree with you, Brian. He's had chances before. There's been times when Bishop was injured before and Vasilevsky just got all the games and he played well. So hopefully he can do it. All right. There's another new backup goalie. Or no. All right. So I guess my question, Brian, is would you rather have Vasilevsky or the next struggling goalie who's now going to be seeing a lot more time in Peter Mrazek, because Jimmy Howard got injured in that same game. He's going to miss 4 to 6 weeks with a sprained MCL. And it's such a downer, right? Jimmy Howard has been having such a resurgence, such a great season. He's still at a .934 save percentage on the year. And, he got injured before and he came back. We thought maybe he'd slow down then. But no, even with that second injury, he came back and played pretty much just as well. But now with this being his second injury of the season, it's hard to rely on him at this point. Who knows if he'll be able to come back and play well? And more so, like, who knows if he'll be able to come back and actually be healthy for the rest of the season? Like, this is a pretty serious injury. It didn't look good when he went down. Peter Mrazek, just like Vasilevsky, has been really, really bad lately, and actually for the whole season. Like, last week he let in 4 goals against Anaheim and then let in 3 goals on 15 shots against Tampa after Howard went down. He's an .896 goalie over the last month, .899 on the season. So whether you look at short-term or long-term, Mrazek has just been bad, bad, bad. Detroit called up Jared Coreau, and he got the 4-3 shutout win on Friday. He got the start, and he got the win against Florida, stopping 31 of 34 shots. So not an amazing game, but better than Mrazek has been doing lately. So pretty much the same questions for you about Mrazek as I had about Vasilevsky. Like, do you have to add Mrazek if he's available, even though he's been brutal? Thoughts on his long-term dynasty value? He's another guy that people have thought, you know, oh, this is a guy that you really want because in 2-3 years when he's the starting goalie on Tampa, because in 2-3 years when he's the starting goalie on Detroit, he's going to have so much value. Also, like Jared Coreau, is he someone worth looking at? Like, is he a better option than Gudlevsky's if you really are in a deep league and want a goalie that's going to be getting at least 1 or 2 starts over the next couple of weeks? And I'm just curious to know your thoughts also on Mrazek versus Vasilevsky. So what are your thoughts on this crappy goaltending situation in Detroit?
Well, one of the worst parts of it for me personally is that it's a huge bummer because we're on pins and needles now to see how much longer Jimmy Howard can keep performing at that level. I was really pumped to see him return, to see if he could keep it up, if he'd prove me right or wrong. And now we have to wait even longer for that. And now there's even more of an excuse should he not be able to maintain his high level of play from before. But let's focus on the present and who will be in the net. Peter Mrazek has been very bad, yes. He had been above league average in 80 starts before this year, and he also fared pretty well. He was looked on in a pretty friendly way by goals saved above average measures. So this year has actually been a real disappointment. It's worth keeping in mind that Detroit is not a very good team, but I don't think that totally excuses Mrazek's play. I would prefer Vasilevsky to Mrazek. I might prefer Coreau to Gudlevskis, though, because I feel as though Detroit aren't believers in Mrazek, even though I know last year with his performances, a lot of poolies were, and his value shot right up in keeper leagues, and it should still be there. I still think he's got good value as a long-term keeper, goalie. However, we have Jared Coreau. He's an undrafted 25-year-old, seeing his very first games in the NHL. He's been a mid-920s goalie in the AHL in about 90 appearances over the last 3 years. So maybe there's reason to give this guy a look. I personally think that it should be Mrazek in the net for better or for worse, but Detroit has had a very hard time committing to one goalie and trying to ride one goalie for any length of time, anytime they feel like they don't have confidence in the guy. And that's how it seems to me that they feel about Mrazek.
Well, yeah, I mean, the reason why they're having trouble sticking with one goalie is because it looks like they want to stick with one goalie and Jimmy Howard, and he keeps getting injured. Like, if Mrazek keeps on putting sub 900 save percentage numbers, they're going to have no choice but to go to the backup. They can't just like lose every game because they want to stick with Mrazek. So I feel like just like Gudlevsky's, you have to sort of watch and see. And after a couple of bad games, they're going to have to bring in the backup just to see if they could turn things around. But who knows? Maybe Mrazek will be able to do better, though. Like when Howard was injured before and Mrazek got a lot of starts, he still didn't really do anything with it. I remember he had a couple of good games. Like, oh, maybe he's finally reestablishing himself. And then he really struggled. And then when Howard came back, it was so obvious that they had to give him the net back. Anthony here in the chat is saying his lesson is hashtag never draft goalies early. That's his lesson for the year. And yeah, there's been a lot of goalies that maybe we would have expected to do really well, you know, Peter Mrazek included, and you really got burned. And it's a bummer, especially if you got burned and used a high draft pick to get these guys. Obviously, Corey Schneider is maybe the prime example so far. Brian Elliott, who we're actually going to get to later in the show. He's someone that a lot of people spent a lot on. Okay. Anyway, sticking on Detroit, they actually have another injury. Mike Green is injured. They say he's going to be out at least a week. No return date set, but, you know, this is nothing new for Mike Green owners. You know he's going to miss time if you draft him. I remember he missed time last year, and he's been doing okay this season, like not great. I remember he started really well, but he only has 2 points in his last 7 games, so he hasn't been great. And really no one on Detroit on the back end has been getting any points. Like I wonder, normally when a top power play defenseman gets injured, the first question is, who's going to take a spot on the top power play and get an increase in value? Like it looks like Ryan Sproul got the majority of power play time in Detroit's last game, not Nicholas Kronwall, which is interesting. So it's been a big fall for Kronwall, who I actually drafted by with my very last pick in the cupful, thinking it was a sneaky pick as he was injured, and I thought I'd stash him in IR. Then when he came back, I'd have like a top power play guy or someone who'd be sharing time with Mike Green. But like he's done absolutely nothing all year. Ryan Sproul, 6 points in 19 games played. Like, is there any value on him or for any Detroit defenseman at this point? Like, would you add any of them in response to Green being injured?
First off, we need to consider how Green's value has not been very high for most of the season. Appearances can be deceiving. Over the season, he looks okay. I thought you had his numbers here. I think it's, let me just pull them up. With 7 goals and 11 assists for 18 points in 32 games, 4 power play points amongst those. That's okay. That's above a half point per game pace. But almost half, like, I don't know, 40% of those points came in his first 5 games. 7 of those points, 3 goals, 4 assists. He had that hat trick. And then since then, he has just 4 goals, 7 assists for 11 points in his last 27 games, which is a sub 40-point pace. There's very little value on that Detroit back end. Even if you're looking at Mike Green, you try and figure out another guy who Detroit has had since the Kronwall, since the Lidstrom and Rafalski days back that ended in 2010, 2011. Nicholas Kronwall is the only Detroit defenseman to exceed 40 points in a year since that time. And he's had a pretty good stretch of power play production. 92 power play points combined over the last 5 years. So it's interesting to me that they're not putting him back in that role. I mean, you look at his numbers in that role, and there was a nice bump in the middle, and he has been on the decline for the last couple of years, but that still might make him better than any of the other options. No Detroit defenseman outside of Mike Green has more than 6 points this year, which is just a really sad thing. You look at Ryan Sproul as a potential replacement, and there's just not a lot to say about him. He wasn't even a half point per game guy in Grand Rapids over the last few years, and he was healthy scratched as recently as December 13th. I do remember last year, maybe it was the year before, there was a little bit of hype, as there was for Brendan Smith in Detroit, for him having an opportunity to emerge as a power play guy in Detroit. It just seems like that doesn't happen anymore. Nicholas Kronwall has been the only defenseman who's seen any measure of success, and already that was 2 and 3 seasons ago. I don't know who the next valuable defenseman in Detroit will be, especially with Datsuk gone. Thin lineup.
Yeah, for sure. And hey, Green might only be out like a week, so maybe that's not even worth looking into it. Like, really, Detroit just doesn't score as many goals as we would think, because they do have what looks like a pretty deep, at least top 6, like a lot of names that we would have thought would have been fantasy relevant. But really, everything's pretty much the same since the last time we checked in on Detroit. Like, Zetterberg has been good. Nielsen and Vanek chipping in every once in a while, like staying on the fringes of fantasy relevance. And you've got like Larkin, Nyquist, and Tatar, all guys who were probably drafted in your leagues at the beginning of the year that might be in free agency now because they're still not doing much. Tatar had a hat trick 3 games ago, but all zeros before that game and after that game. So that was just a very weird blip out of nowhere. I guess one guy still performing pretty well that might be available to they might want to look at is Anthony Mantha. We mentioned a little while ago. He's still doing pretty well. He's actually currently riding a 3-game point streak, 2 goals and 2 assists in that span. He took, one sec. I wrote he took shots on goal, but I didn't say how many. The people watching live, getting the live experience here.
Wow, lucky them.
Lucky them. He took 4. Oh, I wrote F-O-R. Oh, come on, Elon. All right. Took 4 shots on goal in the last game against Florida, and he's been playing with Zetterberg and Tatar at even strength and on the top power play. So it's a good situation for Mantha, and he's been performing lately, so maybe he's worth looking at if he's in your free agent list. I'd be curious, Brian, which of the Detroit forwards would you want over him right now, aside from Zetterberg? Like, is there any Detroit forward free agent better than Mantha right now? If you could have any free agent you want that's not named Zetterberg, who would you take?
Well, I think Larkin and Nielsen could be decent guys. I don't know if you're assuming that they're not free agents, Mantha is a decent half-point per game option. His shot taking, it slowed down considerably recently, but he did just put 4 shots on net in his most recent outing, and his rate stats actually put him in the top 5 Detroit forwards this year, and even in the top 3 if you're looking at individual expected goals for per 60 minutes. Add to that, like you said, good line mates in Zetterberg and, well, Tatar. Whether that's good or not is up in the air, but it's better than a lot of the other options. Power play time, and he is a pretty good guy for you to cycle into your lineup if you're looking for another goal or two in a given week. I know I wanted to a couple weeks ago. I decided not to because I had too many right wingers, and he scored a goal that night. I'll never forget it.
Oh, Anthony's saying Vanek. Yeah, Vanek, he's been like decent, right? But not someone you could really rely on. You know, Brian, we actually added Tatar as a spot start in our joint league last week on the Monday. And I thought, oh, he got a hat trick the last game. Maybe he'll be able to get another goal. Then that game got canceled. Like, what the heck? My spot starter didn't even play. Oh, that was the worst. That was very frustrating. They like couldn't get the ice cold enough in Carolina, I think. Ugh. Ridiculous. Anyway, also we had a question on Facebook, Mantha versus Palmieri. Keegan asked us in our patron-only Facebook group, which Palmieri is a name actually that we haven't mentioned for a while on the podcast. When we're talking about guys on New Jersey, we tend to talk about Hall, and then we've talked about Camilleri, who had some good runs. Then Zajac was so good. He was like the leading scorer on the team for a while. Like Palmieri versus Mantha. It's an interesting question. Who would you go with?
It is an interesting question. So I think I would go with whoever's being deployed in a better way. Palmieri is either playing with Pavel Zacha and Bo Bennett or Taylor Hall and Travis Zajac, which of course is much more preferable. And he is getting some power play time, but again, bouncing between the best power play unit and the not as good power play unit in New Jersey. So I would say whoever has the best deployment, if their deployment is equal, I would say both of them might get you a little run to help you in a given week, but you can probably expect 45 to 50 point pace from both. Maybe that's a little high for Mantha. I suppose Palmieri's upside could be a little higher just based on his experience in the league.
Yeah, Palmieri, by the way, 2 goals in his last 2 games, 1 goal against Pittsburgh, 1 goal against Philadelphia. Then he had a 2 assist game 4 games ago against the Rangers. So he's been, doing pretty well lately. And last year he did have 57 points, which I know you called on the podcast and said that was not going to repeat itself. And it's clearly not going to. He's probably going to be closer to 45 to 50, like you said. But okay, I'll go with Palmieri. I didn't have a chance to answer on Facebook today. So there you go, Keegan. That's my answer though. Mantha, not so bad. All right. Let's go to our next injury. Rick Nash is out indefinitely with a groin injury, so this could be short or long term. We don't know. That's another thing with this time off, since there haven't been games since Friday. There also haven't been morning skates, and we haven't been getting announcements. So maybe some of these injuries we'll find out in 2 days that these guys are back. But it's interesting to bring up the Rangers anyways, because Rick Nash, so he's been having a decent season, I guess. He has 20 points in 30 games, 13 goals and 7 assists. That's a 55-point pace, which is not bad. A 35-goal pace, which is actually really good. But pretty much what we expected. Maybe a few more goals than we expected. But overall, I didn't think of him as a 60-point guy anymore. But he's been pretty solid. Unfortunately, another thing we always expected about Rick Nash is that he's going to miss time, just like Mike Green. He's been pretty injury-prone over the last few seasons of his career. But anyways, forget about Rick Nash. If you have him, you could stash him. I guess that's, you're not totally screwed, though obviously it's a bit of a downer. But what's happened to the Rangers that we were so excited about at the beginning of the year? I know, Brian, you weren't, but a lot of people were so excited about all of these guys getting points, the Hayes and the JT Miller. And by the way, Hayes, that's who I started the show referencing. I searched our doc for players who have yes as part of their name, and Kevin Hayes is the only one who came up. But I don't know, maybe he didn't deserve it, just like you didn't like how I brought up Borowiecki last week as the person for me to yell at the beginning, because Hayes has been just as bad. If you look at the Rangers players, they've really transformed back into being a team that only has one good line when, we talked about how they have so much depth. So, their top line of Stepan, Kreider, and Zuccarello, and that's what they've been running for the last couple of games. Over the last 15 games, which is about a month or so, Stepan has 13 points in those 15 games, Kreider 11, Zuccarello 10. So they've been pretty good. McDonough has 7 points in his last 14, so he's been decent. But pretty much everyone else on the Rangers, not worth looking at anymore. Kevin Hayes, 5 points in his last 15. Jimmy Vesey, 5 as well. JT Miller, only 4 points in his last 15. Grabner, we were excited about Grabner. He had a hat trick, I remember, at one point. Anyways, he only has 3 points in his last 15. Brandon Peary, only 2. So I guess regression is a cruel mistress, right, Brian? And you must feel pretty smug that you were right when you were telling people not to drop any significant players for anyone on the Rangers not named Kreider, Zuccarello, or Stepan, or Rick Nash.
What does that say about me that you think I must feel smug? Do you think I like to say "told you so"?
Well, I feel like, you're spending a lot of time doing research and preparing for this podcast. We claim to be the best fantasy hockey podcast out there, so I'd hope that we'd get it right once in a while. So I think you should feel smug. You deserve it. You're doing the work and you're trying to help people. If they didn't listen to you, that's their fault. You got it right. Good for you.
Okay, I get it. And the thing is, I can't get too smug about it because regression has struck far harder than I would have imagined. And that's the reason why some of these guys have gone so cold. After carrying a wildly high team shooting percentage for quite a while, the Rangers are down to a meager 6.5% shooting conversion rate at even strength over the last month. And that qualifies them as unlucky. Only 6 other teams are converting fewer shots into goals than the Rangers are since this time in November. Since the end of November. There was talk of the Rangers having found a way to garner more high-danger chances and play a way that would let them have a higher shooting percentage because of these higher quality chances, and play a way that would let them get... let me try again. And play a way that would let them sustain a higher shooting percentage because of the higher quality chances they were garnering for themselves. This regression that we're seeing certainly dampens those claims. We'll still wait and watch how this plays out through the rest of the year, but either A, that's not a thing, like you can't do that. They didn't find a better way to play to permanently raise their shooting percentage above what's a reasonable amount, or other teams have figured it out. In any case, I still think in New York, it's top line only for me. The guys you mentioned, Nash, Zuccarello, of who's healthy, Stepan, Kreider, Zuccarello. McDonough, by the way, has been a pretty underrated producer on the blue line. I think he's undervalued in a lot of leagues, at least by people who don't own him, or maybe even those who do. Might be worth seeing what you can get for him. Might be worth seeing if you can acquire him, although at this point, like I said, his owner might realize that he's a pretty good guy. There have been a couple weeks where I had cycled in Brandon Peary as kind of a hired gun for an extra game or two, but he never did what I wanted Anthony Mantha to do for me. He never scored in that time. He rarely even got a shot on goal, so I'm not even interested in that anymore. All this depth scoring on the Rangers, I think you can forget about for now, at least until Mika Zibanejad comes back, and that's in 2 to 4 weeks. He'll be someone to watch, someone who could come into the lineup, help another couple guys score, and get himself back on a 50, 55-point pace with a bunch of shots too.
Yeah, that's true. Like Zibanejad being out might be a big part of all of this. Like Anthony asked in the chat here, is it regression or is it other teams adapting? And then Chris said a little bit of both, plus injuries are playing a part as well. And like I said, Zibanejad's out, and also Pavel Buchnevich, who we were talking about at the beginning of the season, someone who was doing really well. He was a top 6 guy. So, maybe if they could get back to Nash, Stepan, and VC, and then Kreider, Zuccarello, and Buchnevich, and then, Zibanejad with JT Miller, like there could still be some value for these guys later on. But for now, I agree with you, Brian. You might as well drop them for players who are producing. Brandon Peary still on the top power play last game, playing with Kreider, Stepan, and Zuccarello. But, nothing to show for it. Like I said, 2 points in his last 15. Let's move on to our next injury. Paul Stastny is on the IR in St. Louis with an upper body injury. He's already been kind of a snoozer for the past little while. He only has 5 points in his last 13 games over the last month. Maybe this gives a chance for Alex Steen to finally wake up, another opening in the top 6, because he'd been playing in the bottom 6 for a little while. A lot of people have been wondering if maybe the time has finally come to give up on Alex Steen. We get these tweets of people, I feel so bad for them. They're like, can I drop Alex Steen, please? Like, I know that they just want us to write, yeah, go ahead and drop him, because they want to, pick up someone who's on a bit of a hot streak. But, it's hard to recommend dropping Alex Steen for like Anthony Mantha, even though Steen has been performing so much worse than Mantha over the last little while. Anyways, let's see what happens with this Stastny injury. But Alex Steen, 1 assist in his last 7 games, only 0, 1, or 2 shots in each of those games. If you look at the last game's lines, it was Laterra, Schwartz, and Tarasenko, and then Steen, Perron, and Berglund, Fabry, Yaskin, and Brodziak. So, but the thing with the St. Louis lines is you can't even look at them because they change all the time. And now I'm curious to see if maybe Steen, if you recall when he came back from injury, he was playing center and like centering Tarasenko. Like that is pretty much the best at this point. At this point, I kind of want to know, is there anyone on St. Louis who can produce outside of playing with Tarasenko? It kind of doesn't seem like that. And is Steen going to be able to get points if he doesn't play with Tarasenko on the top line or power play?
I wasn't, oh yeah, you had a whole thing, huh? Okay. Can you repeat your question?
Is Steen still someone we could rely on to produce when he's not playing with Tarasenko?
I'd like to think yes. I'm a little worried that he's older than we have considered him. Like, just not chronologically, but also with the damage he's taken on his body. He's missed time for injury this year and in the past. I'm losing faith in that he can be a 55, 60 point player who averages 2.5 or 3 shots per game at this point. I'm holding out hope that this isn't a permanent thing, that there is just maybe a nagging injury that this extra few days off is going to help him recover from, or just time with Tarasenko is on the horizon and that's going to make everything better. I don't have much to say about him other than that his play has been quite stinky lately.
Brutal.
Stinky lately.
Yeah, we got it. We got it, Brian. It's okay. But like, how long? So, as a fantasy hockey expert, such as you are, like, how long do you wait for an Alex Steen? Like, if he keeps on doing nothing, getting 1 assist in his next 7 games, do you drop him after the next 7 games? I'm curious, how long of a leash do you give to a guy who's been so productive for so many years, but now is doing nothing and not taking the shots on goal and not playing on a good line? At some point, you have to drop him, but of course, you don't want to drop him. Then, as soon as you do it, finally he's able to produce, and then you're like, I dropped it. Just like what I did, by the way, with Verbata, who went slow for a couple of games. I dropped him for some stupid reason. I'm so frustrated about. I've had a really bad couple of weeks in the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantrax League. But I'm ranting and going off track again. Curious to know, just general strategy, when you have a guy like Alex Steen with the pedigree, with the history, that's doing nothing, how much longer do you wait? You're saying you still have faith. For how much longer will this faith last?
Well, I own him in 2 of my leagues, and he's frustrating me a lot in 2 of my leagues. There's one that's a little shallower, and I'm starting to lose patience there. I think I'm going to give him another couple games, and then we'll see what happens. The other league is the Cupful, the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantrax League, and there just aren't a lot of good free agent options out there. Nobody that I can count on for even more than half point per game upside, let alone reliably half point per game. So for that reason, I will rather keep running with the risk of Steen doing nothing with the hope that he can become a 50, 55 point player again, rather than trade him in for a guy who I can only hope to get to 45 points in the best of circumstances.
Right, which I guess is like Anthony Mantha. You know, you think even in the best case, he's probably not more than a 50-point guy. Steen does have that upside. Okay, we'll put him back on the shelf. Let's bring up Alex Steen in another couple of weeks if he's still doing nothing, and then we'll decide whether we're going to have to officially label him a snoozer or not. Hopefully, he'll bounce back. He was like a 70-point guy just a couple seasons ago, or at least pace, because he never actually plays a full season, of course. Anthony's saying Perron greater than Steen in the chat. You know, Perron also hasn't been that great lately, so it's not as if you could just say that. Like, but, you know, Fabry, by the way, a guy who we were excited about playing with, Tarasenko. And Brian, you said the thing with St. Louis is people are always shifting around, so you can't really rely on anyone. You were totally right. Like, Fabry is now off the Tarasenko line, or at least he was for a bit, and he hasn't been getting as many points lately. It's just basically the Tarasenko show there. It's crazy. This team looked to be really deep, but that's the only line that seems to put up points. By the way, there's a defenseman named Brad Hunt who was called up by St. Louis recently and had a point in each of his first 4 games. Nothing in his last 2 games, but that leaves him with 4 points in 6 games on the season. Is this someone that should be on people's radar? Is this someone that should be on people's radars, or was the run of production kind of just an anomaly, and is he sort of a nobody guy that you shouldn't worry about? I see he's not even playing 20 minutes a game.
Yeah, he's this undrafted, undersized AHL journeyman blue liner, 28 years old, so he's no spring chicken. He had 3 points in 21 career NHL games before this call-up, all of them coming with Edmonton, but he has consistently produced well above a half point per game in the minors. That said, there are plenty of other options on that St. Louis blue line, so I wouldn't expect him to get a really long look at a really great spot to score points anytime in the future. And hey, maybe he's doing great things for Peoria, unless St. Louis has changed affiliates without me knowing.
Someone in the chat could comment on that, I suppose.
Well, I can.
No one cares. I guess that's okay. Yeah, I wouldn't be worried about Brad Hunt, but someone was asking.
I'm wrong. No, I need to fix it.
All right.
I need to fix it. Who is the Blues?
Who cares?
I care. I care so much.
Does anyone in the chat care who the St. Louis Blues affiliate is?
It's not. It's the Chicago Wolves. That just shows you the last NHL video game I bought came when Peoria still was the St. Louis Blues affiliate.
Well, that's actually like probably pretty recently, because the last NHL video game I bought didn't have minor league teams in the picture at all, so I didn't even know that was a thing. But anyway, all right. So But yeah, Brad Hunt, I don't see any reason to add him. Like, for sure, there were some people asking in our Facebook group, so I was wondering if maybe people out there listening were thinking about him. Sometimes a guy just gets points for even 3-4 games in a row, but I always look at the deployment and the shots on goal. If you're not seeing a lot of power play time, and you're not even for a defenseman, I like to see close to 20 minutes, if not over 20 minutes a game. And if not, it's really hard to rely on that defenseman to be able to put up a lot of points. I guess Ghost Bear last year didn't play too many minutes at even strength, but he made up for it with power play time. So that's the thing you have to check there. Okay, Brian, you came up with this great pun, Steam Key, and now everyone who's hearing it is wondering, oh man, I wish I could say that. I would want to go to a St. Louis Blues game with a sign that says Steam Key, and they don't have the opportunity because tickets are so expensive and so frustrating to buy. But actually now that is no longer the case because of our sponsor SeatGeek, because finally buying tickets for sports and concerts has been made easier. You don't have to worry about clicking on and seeing the price, thinking, oh, it looks like a decent price, then right at the last minute it turns out it's actually like 30% higher. They didn't show you all the fees and all of that stuff. With SeatGeek, you see what the final price is going to be right there. And they also want to help you get the most bang for your buck. That's why every ticket on SeatGeek is given a grade based on value. You'll immediately see any underpriced seats and be able to find the best deals that fit your budget. And best of all, if your budget's a little tight, SeatGeek's going to make the deal even better for listeners of Keeping Karlsson. Why don't you tell us about it, Brian?
They sure will. When you sign up for SeatGeek and you enter the promo code KEEPING, you will receive a $20 check in the mail as a rebate from your first purchase of tickets through SeatGeek. So you can knock $20 off the price of whatever you're buying on SeatGeek for the first time because you're a listener of the show, and they appreciate that.
Yeah, and by the way, we appreciate it too because you're kind of supporting the show because you're letting them know that you heard us talking about them. So yeah, download the app next time you want to buy tickets, put in that offer code KEEPING, get your $20 check, and have fun with your funny signs with all of Brian's puns that he comes up with every week. He'll keep them coming. So yeah, for prices on fleek, check out SeatGeek. Let's move on to the next fantasy hockey headline of the week, which is outjuries. So we're through with the injuries. That's nice. Big outjury, Corey Crawford, back for Chicago. We talked about how Howard and Bishop went down, but at least for the Corey Crawford owners, their week wasn't so bad in nets. They got him back. I guess for the people who picked up Darling, that was a bit of a downer. But yeah, not much to say here about Corey Crawford. He's great, right? He let in 2 goals on 34 shots in his return in a 2-1 overtime loss to Colorado. By the way, Calvin Pickard had a good game that game, and probably now people are going to add him, especially since they're saying Varlamov might have a groin injury, though I'm seeing that injury is not going to be long-term, so maybe not. Anyways, with Pickard, he always blows up my stats, so I'm going to not pick him up. But we're talking about Corey Crawford here. He's been great. .927 save percentage on the season. One of the best goalies you can own in fantasy, it seems. So definitely, I would say it's time to dump Scott Darling. Like, he was a great ad for while you had him, and maybe he helped you win a couple of weeks. But I'd say right now, it's pretty obvious that Corey Crawford is going to get in and play the majority of games for Chicago.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. So if you had Darling like I did, it's okay to have dropped him. If you're really on the ball, you would have dropped him already to make another move. Let's just take a minute, though, before we move forward into the future of Crawford and rewind to when he first got injured. And we said that Chicago was a team that was doing really well. I think they were first in the league at that point. But I warned that that wasn't necessarily a reason to put a lot of faith in Darling as somebody who's coming into the crease on the league's top team, because Chicago's success had been coming totally on the back of Corey Crawford. So if Darling couldn't hold up his end of the bargain, or even play phenomenally as Corey Crawford was, we couldn't expect as good things. We couldn't expect to keep the wins coming. But then Darling came in and was fantastic in 10 starts. In Crawford's absence, Darling posted a record of 6-3-1, .930 save percentage, 2.12 goals against average, the 6th best save percentage in the NHL since the start of December amongst regular starters. So good for you, Scott Darling. And the takeaway from all that is that Chicago still leads the league in save percentage at even strength with a .947 that cannot last. For context, only 6 teams last season had a save percentage above .930 last year. The highest was the Rangers at .934, a full 13 points lower than what Chicago's putting up right now. So if you want to make a bet with someone who thinks Chicago remains a top team or in the top 3 or even top 5 in the standings by year's end, maybe that's a good bet for you to make. By the way, before we move on, Elon, while we're talking about the standings, on December 26, 2016, who do you think the first overall team in the NHL is?
Oh, okay. Well, I know that I have in my notes later on that Columbus has won 1,000,000 games in a row, and so has Minnesota. And Columbus was doing good. You're only bringing this up because it's some crazy team, so I'm going to guess Columbus.
It is. It is Columbus. The Columbus Blue Jackets are the best team in the NHL through several games, through to December 26th. And they actually have 2, 3, or 4 games in hand on the rest of the top 5, which is just insane. It's the best start in franchise history. Did I say that already? No.
I don't know. It's fine. You can say it again. It's so noteworthy that it's worth saying twice if you did.
A 23-5-4 record, which is just bonkers. Like, that's hard to believe until you see it on the NHL's website. Interesting, other teams in the top 10, Minnesota, Philadelphia, and Ottawa are all in the top 10 in the league. Philadelphia is actually the only one of that group, including Columbus, who has had subpar goaltending, who has had subpar goaltending. In fact, hasn't had top 5 or top 10 goaltending. Their save percentage ranks 27th in the league so far this year, but it's gotten a lot better lately, and that's helped them get up the standings, plus their shooting percentage is pretty healthy. So good for them. Imagine what they'll do if they can keep having great goaltending through the season as they've had over the last couple of weeks with good goalie Steve Mason.
Yeah, of course, when you look at Philadelphia's save percentage for the whole season, it's basically a tale of two seasons. Like, Mason was so bad and Neuwirth wasn't much better before Neuwirth got injured. Brian, again, I'm going to keep giving you credit. You called it when Neuwirth went down. You said, now's the time to add Mason. He's the type of goalie that needs to play lots of games. And then Philly went and won like 1 million games in a row. Mason has been great. But Brian, I'm not going to let you get away with bringing up how Columbus is the top team in the league without asking, just like Anthony here in the chat, is Columbus a real thing? Like, is that something that you can expect them to keep up? Like you said, Chicago, you expect them to fall because their goaltending has been, maybe too good or unsustainably good, at least. Corey Crawford, no question that he's good, maybe not this good. But Columbus, top team in the league. All of these players have been doing so well. I actually might as well just bring up my little Columbus segment from later on here. They've won 12 in a row now in that stretch. Atkinson, 15 points in 12 games. Gagne, 14 points in 12 games. What? Sam Gagne? He was nothing going into this season. Ridiculous. Brandon Saad, 11 and 12. Wenberg, 10. Hartnell, 9. Dubinsky, 7 points in the last 12, and he was really slow at the start of the year, so he's picked it up. Nick Foligno has 7 points in his last 10 games, so he missed a few with injury, so that's really good. Seth Jones, 7 points. Zach Werenski, only 5 points in his last 12, which is not horrible, but I would have liked a bit more with all of those wins and goals that Columbus is scoring. Anyway, Brian, I guess overall with Columbus, like, do you think these guys can keep up their production? Are they now a top team in the league and worthy of owning all of these guys? Obviously, they're worth owning, but do you think that it's sustainable?
I'd like to think it... I don't know how to answer that question because I've been pretty low on Columbus through this whole thing. I've said their goaltending on the penalty kill will get worse, and it has, but not enough to really hamper them. I said that their shooting percentage on the power play would get lower, and it has a little, but again, not enough to hamper them. They still rank 2nd in the league in PDO, so they are seeing... let me see here. The league's 3rd best save percentage and the league's 4th best shooting percentage. It's rare to be that high in one of those categories, let alone both at the same time. So I expect there to be some regression, especially from Sergei Bobrovsky, who's been playing out of his mind all season long. There are some things that seem to be working. Their even strength play is still very strong. And in fact, defensively, I was reading today, Brad Shaw on defense. I think the article was over at today's Slapshot about how Brad Shaw's come in and really turned that team around. A team that bled shots against down at the bottom of the league last year, all of a sudden right near the top in suppressing shots again. So good for Columbus, good for them. I think they're doing a lot that's working out well and is making them a better team. I don't know if it makes them 1st ranked in the league.
Yeah, maybe top in the league is a bit much. Maybe they won't be able to hold on to that, but they're probably going to make the playoffs. Like, they don't even have to win that many more games, I would think. If they're only like 50% for the rest of the season, they'll probably be well into the playoffs with this big lead they've given themselves. So it'll be interesting to see if they'll be able to now become a team that could win not only in the regular season, but in the playoffs as well. They're going to get their chance. Some people in the chat here are saying maybe that Seth Jones for Johansson trade, maybe that was a pretty good trade for them. Clearly, they didn't need Johansson to get offense, so they might as well get stronger defensively. And Seth Jones, like I said, has even been getting some points. Then also we're having mentions here is Cam Atkinson, the new Tarasenko. Like, we have to mention Cam Atkinson at this point. Like I said, He has 15 points in his last 12. He's up to 35 points in 32 games on the year. That's over a point per game in 32 games. That's not a small sample size. 96 shots on goal in that span. Like, how good is Cam Atkinson? Is he going to get drafted in like the first and second rounds of fantasy leagues next year? Or if not, like, I would think that his owners should be selling high right now and trying to get someone like a Claude Giroux, or who even knows what you could get for a guy with this many points.
There was a time when Cam Atkinson was supposed to be a near can't miss 60-plus point guy, right about the time when he was breaking into the league. That hadn't happened until maybe now. I still think that his percentages are high along with the rest of the teams and that this isn't going to keep up, but it's a fantastic start. If you own Cam Atkinson, I think it'd be crazy not to try to sell high. Same thing with Alex Wenberg, who I think has 29 points in 32 games, almost on a point per game pace himself. These guys are amazing. I don't think they're point per game players. I don't think they're 65 plus point players. I think in a good year, 55 points, maybe they can get close to 60. And that's the pace I'm working with, trying to project the rest of their season. So if you can get an established top-end guy, like maybe you can reach out to Evgeny Malkin's owner and say, look, he's going to get injured at the wrong time. Why not just take Cam Atkinson instead? That would be amazing.
Well, I mean, good luck with that. You're talking about one of the few people who have more points than Cam Atkinson so far on the season. Malkin, I think, is like second in the league behind Connor McDavid. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Brian, I'm curious to know like your strategy. Like, obviously right now you have it in your head that Cam Atkinson is like not more than a 60-point guy. Like, then if he does get, say, like 65 points or even 70 points this season, then when you go into next year's draft, will you reclassify him? Do you sort of work? And by the way, I'm not saying this is a criticism, right? Like, you do very well in fantasy, and that's why I'm asking you this question. Like, how do you decide when to reclassify a player? A guy like Cam Atkinson, who going through, and even now you're saying like you would definitely want to get a guy who's been an established 70-point guy over Cam Atkinson. Like, how long does it take for that to flip for you?
Well, to kick this part off, you said his point totals after 35 games, and you said that's not a small sample. I would argue against that. I would argue that it's a fairly small sample, especially from what we can expect to see from a whole player's career. We've seen players do incredible things out of over 30, 40, even 82 games, and then never return to doing that again. I think a good example of this, Elon, is one of Atkinson's teammates, Nick Foligno, who had that incredible 73-point year, whatever it was, a couple years back. And we looked at the numbers and we said, well, he finished the season with a shooting percentage that was significantly too high, an on-ice shooting percentage that was too high, and some other markers of sustainability or fleetingness that all verge towards fleeting. So I think at the end of the season, no matter how many points Atkinson has, we look at all those things that try and tell us if something can be kept up or not. And right now, I can tell you, he's shooting 3.5 percentage points better at even strength than he was last year. And he's also seeing more than a 1.5% bump in on-ice shooting. Oh, no, sorry, hang on. Got the wrong guy.
What? Who are you talking about?
No. I was talking about him, but everything still applies. I was just looking at the numbers. Oh, okay.
So you said he's seeing a 3.5% shooting percentage.
Yeah, but he's not.
Okay.
I have to say, if I look at the end of the year and I see his numbers stay exactly the way they are, it's like he and Alex Wenberg both seemed like they were doing some pretty sustainable things for a while, and it still looks that way at even strength. If you go ahead and take a look at what they're doing on the power play, though, that's where I found it unsustainable for Alex Wenberg, and I find it similarly unsustainable for Cam Atkinson. He has 16 points on the power play so far this year, 7 goals on 23 shots with the man advantage, a super high IPP. His on-ice shooting percentage is also quite high with the man advantage, although that could be in large part due to his own shooting success. So you can probably take a few of those points away. At the same time, those bumps are matched with other bumps in more sustainable categories. Like his shot attempts are way up, higher than they've ever been per 60 minutes on the power play. So yeah, there's a lot to comb through, and when the season is said and done, that's when I'll feel comfortable doing a postmortem. For now, I still feel like he's somebody you can try and trade for someone you know is going to get 70 points or more.
Yeah, for sure. I guess you could get a for sure 70-point guy. You got to do it. But like, so good, Cam Atkinson. Anthony saying in the chat here, is the league changing faster, more mobile, better for smaller players like Cam Atkinson? So yeah, it's like, clearly something is happening. Like Gojo, Small, like, they're having a fun time in the chat here discussing this. By the way, you could join us live every week, keepingkarlsson.com/live. Obviously, normally it's on Sundays. Today it's on Monday. During the holidays, forget it, but we'll let you know the schedule at the end of the show. Okay. Let's go back to Outjuries, which is where we were before we did this little detour over to Columbus. Let's go to Boston because they've had a couple big names come back. Well, one big name, David Pastrnak, returned for the Bruins for Thursday and Friday's games. No points, but 3 and 5 shots respectively. We already talked about him when he got injured, saying how great of a season he's been having, so we won't dig too much into him. But I will say he was back on the top line with Bergeron and Marchand and on the power play with those guys. And you think I'm going to say David Krejci, don't you? But I won't. It's Ryan Spooner who was on the top power play with Pastrnak, Marchand, and Bergeron in the last game. Ryan Spooner, remember him? The guy going into the season that we thought was going to maybe have a bit of a breakout year. We thought he was going to be in the top 6 and on the top power play, and he was on the bottom 6 and not getting power play time. He's been kind of useless all year. All of a sudden, Spooner jumps to the top power play. He also joined Krejci and Backes on the second line, and Frank Vetrano came in, and we'll get to him in a second, and we were thinking, and a lot of the patrons on Facebook were saying they thought Frank Vetrano was going to make a huge impact, but maybe he doesn't have room if Ryan Spooner is able to hold this spot. Spooner had 1 assist at Florida, then a goal and an assist in the last game against Carolina. So is it time to consider him relevant again, or am I getting too excited about 2 games in a good role with a bit of production? He's finally getting 16 plus minutes in his last 4 games after being closer to 10 or 11 for a stretch before that. He also took like 6 shots in the last game. So Ryan Spooner definitely had a good end to, I guess, 2016, or there'll be a couple of more games, but a big end to the pre-Christmas 2016. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on him as someone who seems to finally be getting the spot that we thought he would at the beginning of the year.
It looks like he's out of the doghouse, which bodes well for at least a little bit of sunshine for Ryan Spooner. And of course, he's taking advantage. It's helping him get points. His rate stats, though, they don't actually place him amongst the top 6 forwards in Boston. But we do know that Claude Julien has not been making it easy on him through the year. He fell down the depth chart a lot sooner than we thought he would, if we even thought he would at all. I don't think that he's a can't-miss guy for your lineup all of a sudden, but I think there's 50-point value if he holds on to a good spot on the Boston depth chart. However, I'm still concerned that Julien still has a thing for him, that his next mistake is the one that lands him back on the bench for significantly more time per game. This is a big bump we're seeing from him, and it's the ice time I'd like to see. But I'm not ready to buy in completely, both because I still think his spot is a little precarious in the lineup, and I also don't think his upside is super high. Like 55 points is probably the most you could hope for, and I think 50 points is most reasonable.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't have to really buy. Like, no one is thinking that they're going to be adding Ryan Spooner and he's going to all of a sudden become like a 70-point player. But, sometimes on this show, we got to bring up some guys that you're going to think of cycling in for the next week or two until they slow down. And I think as long as he's on the top power play in Boston with David Pastrnak and company, he's worth looking at. Or maybe you might want to be stubborn and look at Frank Vetrano. And now I'm sort of poking fun at Patty, especially here in the chat, who's been a big fan of Vetrano ever since we found out that he was going to be coming back, and she was saying, oh, he thought he'd be good. And I think a few people were actually really excited about him. So, and obviously a great return. He scored a goal on his first shot in his first game back at Florida, then nothing against Carolina, 2-1 shots in those 2 games he's played respectively. He's been seeing second power play unit time, third line. But, I remember when Gaborik came back and he started on the third line, and, he just needed to get his legs, and he ended up moving into the top 6. So I don't know if maybe his role will increase as he adjusts to getting back to playing in the NHL after missing the whole season with an injury. A few patrons wanted to drop, like I said, decent pieces for Frank Vetrano. Is there any value there?
I'm not sure there's a ton. He's a guy who had 8 goals and 3 assists for 11 points in his first year last season. He played 39 games. He had 2 goals in his 2 tune-up games for Providence. I'm not overly excited about him. I know there's a lot of love in Boston for him, but I don't think it's enough to encourage you to drop substantial pieces for him. Maybe a decent guy to have on your radar for cycle starts, but at this point, nothing more. I would prefer Spooner if I was choosing between the 2.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you got to take the guy on the top power play. Spooner versus like Anthony Mantha. Where do you go there, Brian? For, not for the whole season, like for the next couple weeks.
I think I'll still go with Mantha because I just, like I said like 3 times in the last 3 minutes, I just don't trust that Ryan Spooner can maintain his spot in the lineup for very long. I think he's going to make a minor mistake or maybe a big mistake, and he's going to pay the price in ice time and deployment.
Okay, and I'll bring up another guy right now that maybe we could add to this conversation. Let's check in on Carolina. They had a couple of outjuries recently. Elias Lindholm has been back for 5 games after he missed 5 games with a lower body injury. He's a guy that some people were excited about going into the season, at least as someone who could maybe get a 50-point pace, but he hasn't been doing it. He's been having a pretty weak season, but looks like he got back with Victor Rask and Jeff Skinner last game on the top line, and he contributed 2 assists. So that's obviously a good spot to be in, and that's also good for Victor Rask, who had been playing with some guys that I wasn't too happy about as a Victor Rask owner. Still, though, not getting power play time. We're talking about Elias Lindholm here, though I'd imagine he's still a fringe guy. He's probably available as a free agent in your league. I'm curious to know what you think about him compared to these other guys like the Ryan Spooners of the world.
I guess I'd prefer him over the Ryan Spooners of the world because I expect some consistency at the top end of the lineup, although we've seen what that's worth in Carolina, which is not a whole lot of points. It's actually been Jeff Skinner and Derek Ryan, that undrafted 29-year-old we mentioned a couple weeks ago. They've been leading the way for the Hurricanes with 11 points in their last 15 games, but Lindholm's return pushed Ryan off of that top line. Maybe it pushes him off of it for good. Derek Ryan spent time on a line with Lee Stempniak and Brock McGinn in his most recent game. So if you've got a drop to make and Derek Ryan is on your team, now would probably be a sensible time. If you got to choose between Lindholm and Spooner as the guy you add for Derek Ryan, I'd probably go Lindholm, but he has been a disappointment for like 2 years at least now in fantasy, seemingly always in a position to score and put up points. But again, that's just not the sort of thing that happens in Carolina very easily.
Yeah, though it has finally been happening somewhat easily for Justin Falk, who did nothing all year, but he actually has 7 points in his last 5 games. So finally a reprieve for all these Falk owners who have been holding on so frustrated all year. Hopefully this will continue into 2017. What's going on over there?
Oh, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll mute my microphone while you're talking.
Hopefully this will continue going into 2017 for Justin Falk. We expected him to be like a 45, 50-point guy. Hopefully he can stay on that pace or maybe even more. Like I said, 7 points his last 5 games. There's been actually a few defensemen who people were so frustrated about for so long who have finally started to produce. John Karlsson, 6 points in his last 6. Torrey Krug, 6 points in his last 7. So finally the people who drafted these defensemen, and I actually own all 3 of them, Brian, in our league that we're against each other in. So I've finally been able to see some production. I actually saw a lot of it against you last week when I was able to come back and get a big 6-4-1, I believe, win. So that was nice. And by the way, you talked about Derek Ryan. I wonder how the guy in our league is feeling who dropped Brandon Saad for him last week. What a dummy.
What a dummy. And it helped you, and that makes me even more upset about it.
Yeah, I spent 11 fab dollars, and I'm happy to have done it. Okay, so that's it for outros. Oh, no, one more. Brian's favorite player, let's mention also in Carolina, Eddie Lack has been taken off the IR. He hasn't played a game yet. But Cam Ward, he went through a rough stretch, but has actually bounced back with 3 great games, all wins before the break. So, Brian, are you getting excited to add Eddie Lack next time he gets a start so that you can spot start him and hope that he finally takes the job away from Cam Ward?
No, I'm not. Eddie Lack is no longer my favorite player. Carolina's won 5 of their last 7, and I only mention that because my first thought was like, I don't want Lack at all because Carolina doesn't even win enough games to make it worthwhile. And then I checked, and they've been doing really well lately, but they're still in the bottom half of league standings, even with that little run. And then going back to Lack personally, what has he done this year? Well, he's put up an .856 save percentage. 1 out of his 4 starts have been quality. And he has embarrassed me terribly, both on the show and in my own leagues where I committed to him for way too long, waiting for Cam Ward to relinquish the job to the clearly better goalie. Something's just not happening in Carolina to make that work, though. So I had hope coming into the season, but it was so much hope, and I had it last year too. It's time for me to get over him. I'm not saying he's no good and that there's no chance in the future, but he's nearing Darcy Kemper territory for me in terms of goalies that have burned me too many times. Darcy Kemper is like the ultimate pinnacle of a goalie that made me so mad at him for all my continued faith in him that was never rewarded except for the times that I finally gave up. So, hey, maybe this is the time to start considering Lack. I don't think so, though. I think he's going to need to leave Carolina for something good to happen.
Yeah, so basically you're saying that you're giving him the ultimate anti-jinx right now, and maybe now that you said you're finally giving up on him, now's the time that he'll finally be good. Like, he'll probably get a game at some point in the next week or two. Like, they're not just going to play Cam Ward every game, and he is the backup goalie. I'll be interested to see how Eddie Lack does. Maybe his time recovering from injury has also given him some time to reevaluate his game, figure out what's been missing since he left Vancouver. Okay, Brian, so we're done with outros. Let's go to our next fantasy hockey headline of the week, which are cold streaks. We already talked about Alex Steen, who's been so bad, but I want to mention him again and how stinky he has been. He's been almost as bad as Eddie Lack, who's been lacking the talent needed to help your fantasy team. I wonder if we could come up with a pun for this next guy, Jordan Eberle, whose name has been popping up a lot on Twitter and in our patron-only Facebook group, people asking if it's time to give up Jordan Eberle. And if you take a look, even though he's been on the McDavid line for much of the season, including recently, he is pointless in his last 6 games played. He's even been off the top power play for a while. Looks like he got bumped by Mark Letestu, so we'll get back to him in a second. And actually, last game versus San Jose, it looks like they moved McDavid to play with Pat Maroon and Draisaitl and brought up Ryan Nugent-Hopkins to center Lucic and Eberle. So Edmonton, I guess, is moving things around, which isn't good for Eberle. But like even when he was with McDavid, he hasn't been scoring lately. Like I said, overall, he has 23 points in 36 games played on the season, which is a 52-point pace, which is like not that great. That's like fringe fantasy relevant numbers. So when do people start considering I heard something there. Okay. So when do people start considering giving up on Jordan Eberle? And I'd be curious where you rank him with Alex Steen.
I feel
actually, let me say.
Okay.
Because I'll bet you there are people with Steen in their leagues that have seen Eberle dropped that are like, oh, should I drop Steen for Eberle? And I'll bet you there's also people with Eberle in their leagues that have seen Steen dropped and think, oh, should I drop Steen? Or maybe I said the same thing twice. But you're going to get what I'm saying. Like whenever you have a slumping player and then another slumping player gets dropped, that's when we get the question, oh, should I drop this slumping player for this slumping player? So you might be on either side of this equation. So Brian, I'd be curious to know if one of them should be dropping their guy for the other guy.
I think I would prefer Jordan Eberle over Alex Steen. I have Alex Steen in those leagues. If Eberle was available, I would make that move. I think Eberle's struggles are a symptom of a bigger problem in Edmonton that's been happening over the last little while. They've been experiencing a plummeting share of goals for, shots and shot attempts. And part of that might have been because their schedule leading into the break was treacherous in both the amount of games they played and the opposition that they were playing too. Now, Eberle, there's no way I can excuse him having only 7 shots in these 6 pointless games, but I am hoping that it is just a rest thing, that they just need to get their bearings again and everything's going to be okay. The thing with the Oilers is that if you're not playing with McDavid, and I know you said he's been with McDavid for a bunch and sometimes without also, there's no secondary driver of offense on that team. Patrick Maroon actually seems to be the next best guy after McDavid at making his line mates better when he plays with them, but he's not someone Eberle is going to get to play with very often. I think at the end of the day, this is just 6 games. For Eberle, it's been a really bad 6 games, but it's still just 6 games. I know the bigger picture, Elon, at this point is that he's on a 52-point pace, but I don't really have long-term concerns about Eberle's play. I still think of him I still think of him as a 55, 60-point guy, and we can cut him some slack on some unreasonably low individual and on-ice shooting percentages as well. I think we need to take a breath and see if he can at least get those shots on goal numbers to come back now that there's been a bit of a break in the schedule. I would be ready to buy low if you see an Eberle owner who is losing faith.
So you're basically saying he's had some ebbs, Eberles and flows, but you think he's going to bounce back. Okay, I'm going to stop this. This is your job, actually, to come up with the episode titles with all these puns. And actually, that was Patty in the chat room who came up with that. So, okay, you're saying also that the only other person who's been driving offense aside from McDavid has been Pat Maroon. I got to ask you about Leon Draisaitl. He's been so good this season. Maybe you're going to say that he hasn't been doing it in terms of Corsi or whatever. But Draisaitl, I'm curious, have you changed your mind about him? He's someone who, going into the season, you said that you didn't think he'd be able to do what he did last year with Taylor Hall out of the picture. And even not playing with Connor McDavid, he still has 5 points in his last 4 games, up to 31 points in 36 games overall on the season. I'd be curious to know if you'd prefer Draisaitl or Eberle moving forward.
That's a tougher one than I'd like to admit. You know, the thing with Draisaitl is he doesn't drive play. He's not a driver. He's somebody who's very good at riding shotgun with guys who can drive play, but he rarely makes the people around him better. In fact, sometimes he makes them worse. and that's my general concern with Draisaitl. But hey, as long as he's playing with McDavid sometimes and on a very, very strong Oilers power play, he has 14 power play points in 36 games. That's 2 more power play points already this year in 32 games or whatever than he had in the first 109 games of his career combined. My overall line on him hasn't changed, though. He's valuable with McDavid and with power play time. Not so valuable without him, although I do need to give him some credit. The large majority of his even strength points have come without McDavid, and he's second on the team in even strength points, sandwiched between McDavid and Maroon. It's been a good year for him. I don't know. You can hear me. I keep going back and forth saying, well, he's not that good at this, but his points are really good, but he's not that good at this, but his points are still really good. So I don't know where to land on Leon Draisaitl, except that he's a good player when he's playing with other talented players. I would be concerned if he falls off that top power play or never plays again with Connor McDavid. I'd hope at least in the meantime he gets to play with Patrick Maroon. And let me just got to come up with a conclusion here. I'm ready to eat a bit of crow on Leon Draisaitl. I know I've poo-pooed him a lot over the last couple of years, and I've been right maybe as often as I've been wrong. This has been a very good year for Leon Draisaitl, and if you have him in your league, I guess you can just enjoy the ride for now. I don't see any imminent changes you need to make, unless, of course, you can do what you would do with Cam Atkinson, which is trade for somebody who's been on Draisaitl's current point pace for many years before in the past.
You mean like Alex Steen?
For many years before. Sorry, I needed to change the way I said it. For many years before.
So you mean like Alex Steen?
No, not like Alex Steen, because Alex Steen is getting old and he's a little banged up. He's not someone I'd be excited to obtain, although, I don't know, that would be an interesting thought. I'm not ready to make a bet on it or anything, but Draisaitl or Steen rest of season, that could be an interesting one.
I think it's going to be Draisaitl, but you know me, I'm not the person who is able to look past the most recent play, or I try to my best, but like, it's been a whole season and Draisaitl has been so good. But like you say, it's interesting that his underlying numbers don't seem to support the hypothesis that he'll be able to keep this up, but of course we'll see. And I guess, yeah, we're on Edmonton. I still want to mention a couple of the guys that you have been mentioning slightly, because all these guys so far, the Eberle's and the Draisaitl's, they're not available to you in free agency, but maybe Mark Letestu is. And like I said, he's the one who bumped Eberle off the top power play. He's playing the Sam Gagner role right now, as he's out of the top 6 on even strength, but on the top power play. And he has 7 points in his last 6 games, just like Sam Gagner has been doing. So sometimes power play is all you need, even though actually only 3 of those 7 points have been on the power play. So I don't even know. But Mark Letestu, he played 20 minutes versus San Jose, so he got a lot of time. Obviously, the coach has faith in him. I don't really even know who he is, like where he came from. Like, has he been on the Oilers for a while? I'd be curious to know if he's worth a spot start pickup. And I'll also throw out Pat Maroon, like we've been mentioning a bunch of times. He had that good run earlier when he was playing with McDavid, and then, he went quiet when he was away from him. He seems like the kind of guy that could only really put up offense when he's on the McDavid line. But hey, 2 goals in his last 3 games. And like I said, he's playing with McDavid again, or at least he was for the second half of the last game against San Jose.
Letestu's been around a while. He's already 31. He's played for Pittsburgh and Columbus in the past. Never been a huge producer. He's done well in the AHL, but in the NHL, 169 points in 433 career games. He has been a great contributor to that Oilers power play, though. Over at Copper and Blue, there's been a few very good articles about what's happening with the Oilers right now, who's helping, who's hurting, and a lot has been focused on this power play. There were concerns that they've been in the top of the league all year long, but they lagged behind in the amount of unblocked shot attempts that they were generating with the man advantage, which could have been a canary in a coal mine for speaking to that success on the power play being unsustainable. Letestu, though, since he's been getting more power play time, the Oilers have been generating more unblocked shot attempts. So I don't know if that's mere coincidence or if that is Letestu helping out, but he is. What's the fruits of your labor? Bearing the fruit, harvesting? What's the thing?
I don't know, man.
What's the saying? Okay. But he is cashing in on the fruits of his labor on that power play. I wouldn't expect big things to come at even strength, but perhaps some continued time on power play 1 could make him a decent depth guy to have in some formats. Elon, I think Sam Gagner was a very apropos comparison.
Okay, and there's a lot of people who are probably kicking themselves because they didn't add Sam Gagner and okay, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are kicking themselves right now because Okay, and I'll bet there's a lot of people who are kicking themselves right now because they didn't add Sam Gagner when they had the chance. Are you recommending that they don't make the same mistake with Mark Letestu? Like, if we're comparing him to, say, Elias Lindholm or Mantha, or who else did we bring up earlier? I don't know, like these guys that have been in our conversation so far this episode, does Letestu rank among the top of them?
For like niche production,
Oh,
if
wait,
you're
say it again. It's sort of like cut out at the beginning.
yeah. For like niche production, for someone who can get you special teams points, which are harder to find on the waiver wire than just whatever points, he could have some value there. I know he had value for me when I picked him up in a spot start in my most recent cupful matchup against Anthony in the chat, who's been referenced a couple times. It was a tough matchup, but Letestu helped put me over the top. I don't know how, like, Elon, you'd have to give me some examples. Like, I guess I'd prefer him to Spooner. I'd probably prefer him to Mantha. As long as he's on that top power play with Connor McDavid, I consider him one of the better depth adds that we've discussed this week. How about that?
I think that sounds great. It sounds like you're saying he's probably one of the top free agents in a lot of leagues, and you have him above Pat Maroon as well.
That's a tougher one. I feel like Pat Maroon is going to be in a better position for the majority of the season. So maybe I would still prefer Patrick Maroon, especially in a hits league. Like I said, he's been really good at driving play, making his line mates better, looking good on his own merits. He's one of the few Oilers who looks just as good away from McDavid, or maybe not just as good, but still decent away from McDavid compared to how he looks with McDavid. I guess, I don't know. I'm going to hedge on that. I don't know. Maroon or Letestu? I'll go Maroon.
I'm surprised, actually. I probably would just go Ryan Spooner right now, being on the top power play in Boston. So I'm going to go completely off course from what you're going with. All right, let's go to another player on cold streaks. Actually, we have a couple of Montreal Canadiens that have been surprisingly quiet recently. And these are guys we've been talking about for how well they've been doing all season. And no, I'm not going to bring up Brendan Gallagher again. I know I want to, and I want to try to get you to tell me that he's going to be good. But all right, I'll stop bringing him up. I'm going to bring up bigger names. Radulov, pointless in his last 6 games. He had a goal and assist in the rout of Colorado, but was also pointless in the 2 games before that. So it's been a very long cold stretch for Radulov. I guess Phil Dano isn't the line mate that Galchenyuk was for him, along with Pacioretty. Should Radulov owners be worried? Galchenyuk will likely still be out for all of January. Then the other guy in Montreal, Shea Weber, he only has 1 assist in his last 12 games played. And actually the one game where he got the assist is the one game where Brian and I benched him in our joint league, and we literally lost by the value of an assist. So that's a bummer, of course. But anyways, yeah, Shea Weber and Radulov both doing nothing. But yeah, Shea Weber and Radulov both doing pretty much nothing lately. Like Weber, he had 18 points in 22 games before this stretch of only 1 assist in 12 games played. So it's been like 2 completely opposite stretches for him. He's either the best in the league or he's doing nothing. Is the answer to what has happened to both of these guys simply that Galchenyuk and Desharnais got injured, or is there something more going on?
I don't think there's any more going on. There's no really alarming trends over the last 10 games. I was looking at their rolling averages for shots for, scoring chances for, shooting percentage, and there are a few like little expected dips, but nothing drastic enough to suggest that this is going to be the new normal, even with Galchenyuk out. Obviously, scoring is going to be a little more difficult with a lot thinner, with a lot fewer options down the middle, but something else is happening, and that's, But something else has also been happening worth noting. The Habs power play scoring has slowed down a little bit, and I think that's hurt them. Only 3 power play goals in their last 9 games, 6 power play goals in their last 13 or 14, and that is where Radulov and Weber can help make up for any shortcomings at even strength, and it's just not happening lately. I still think they're both going to be okay in the long run. I wouldn't get too upset if you're... I know it's hard to not get too upset because I own Radulov in 1 league and Weber in 2 others, but I'm just going to stay the course and think that everything is going to be more or less okay. Not as good as if Galchenyuk was there, but it's still going to be okay until he gets back.
Yeah, and then you have him for your fantasy hockey playoffs, and hopefully Galchenyuk will be back by then. Like he probably will be, and then hopefully everything will get back to how it was during that glorious start. Some people in the Facebook group and also here Anthony saying in the chat that maybe some people have figured out Weber and his role on the Montreal power play. Like teams have adapted to playing against how Weber is used on the power play, and that's been a cause of him slowing down and Montreal not scoring as many power play goals. Do you think there's any? What's the saying for that?
Correlation?
There's, or no, is there any merit? Okay, is there any merit? Sorry. Merit to that assessment?
Sorry, what's the assessment?
That teams have adapted to playing against Shea Weber on the Montreal power play, how they like always pass to him and he does a one-timer, so now they know to like just prepare for that.
That's something I'm going to probably have to watch a few Habs games in the near future to get a better handle on. Looking at the rolling averages that I was talking about, I looked at them at even strength and on the power play, and again, I didn't see any significant dips or anything so worrying that I think something that was really working before isn't going to work in the future. They were benefiting from some fairly high shooting percentages at one point, and so maybe that's just regression playing itself out. But I don't subscribe to the theory. Maybe other teams are adjusting, sure, but I still think Weber is good for 50-plus points, and Radulov could still get to 60-point pace. Could still manage a 60-point pace through the rest of the year.
Okay, and one more cold streak I want to get to before we end the show on some players on hot streaks. I have to eat some crow right now and admit that I think you were right, Brian, about Jack Eichel. And I was being a bit of a dummy when I got overly excited about his 4 points in his first 2 games after coming back from injury. After he got those 4 points in 2 games, he only has a 1-assist game and a 2-goal and 1-assist game in 10 games, and then 8 pointless games, including the last 5. So, you have 2 good games and 8 nothing games in the last 10 for Jack Eichel, which is not what I expected when he came back. I thought he was going to rejuvenate the rest of the Sabres and be a really dynamic player himself. So maybe he's not the 70-point pace player I was expecting, maybe closer to 60 like you were saying, or hopefully not, but maybe less. I don't know. But funny enough, the guys I was expecting Eichel to prop up, they still have been pretty good. Like Ristolainen has 14 points in his last 13 games. So you couldn't have expected much more from him. And if you held on to him, and I mean, he was good all year and you thought he was going to do better with Eichel back, and he has been, even though Eichel hasn't been cashing in on those points. I feel like Ryan O'Reilly is like really the top center on Buffalo. Like he's been really good himself, and he's obviously driving a lot of play, but also Sam Reinhart, he has 10 points in his last 13. Playing on the O'Reilly line, by the way. He started with Jack Eichel, but he moved to play with O'Reilly. Evander Kane, 9 points in his last 13, including 6 goals and 45 shots, which is exactly what you expected from Evander Kane. A whole bunch of shots and a few of them going in, which you weren't getting when he first came back from his injury, and I feel kind of dumb for having dropped him at one point when he was, not doing anything. Kyle Okposo has 10 points in his last 13, O'Reilly 9. So all these other guys, aside from Jack Eichel, are putting up points. What direction do you see all these guys going moving forward, including Jack Eichel?
It is funny that all these guys who we thought Jack Eichel was going to come back and help are helping themselves, it seems like, while Jack Eichel still struggles, except I don't think that's exactly what's happening. I think Jack Eichel has brought some needed depth to that top 6, and so we're seeing things click a little better because he's in the lineup. Even if he isn't getting points, his IPP is down a little bit. He's only in on 57% of all goals scored while he's on the ice so far this year, when last year he was in on almost 75% of all the goals. So maybe his true IPP number is going to end up somewhere in the middle. We haven't seen enough from him to imagine, but a high-end forward could be at 65, 70. His shooting percentage is actually better than it should be. His even strength shooting is at over 10%, and his on-ice shooting percentage is near 9%. Those numbers both look high to me, so it's almost like we should be expecting some regression there. Let me get back to my notes.
Brian, too much eggnog over the holiday.
Yeah, too much eggnog. Not enough eggnog, actually, is the real answer. I don't know. I think all that stuff is probably going to be a wash, and Jack Eichel is going to be okay. This isn't symptomatic of anything in the future. I'm glad you'll acknowledge that Jack Eichel isn't a 70, 75-point player because he came back from injury and was on fire in the first couple games. He's still, in my mind, better than a 60-point player or a 60 sorry, or a 60-plus point player. I think that's something you can count on. If not this year, at least he'll get close to that and then surpass it in future years. And Elon, if it makes you feel any better, you dropped Kane and I dropped Reinhardt. So I lost out on all those wonderful points, and somebody else in the Sweden division of the Cupful is getting them after I rode with Reinhardt for so long, just waiting for everything to even out. I just couldn't hang on to him long enough.
Yeah, well, that happens. Like, fantasy hockey can be very frustrating sometimes. I feel like you have to almost clear your memory after you drop someone and try not to remember all of the guys that you've dropped along the way, especially if you've made some mistakes. And yeah, I was kind of playing devil's advocate. I don't think that Jack Eichel is like a bust or anything. I agree with you. I think he's still really good. Like Anthony's saying in the chat, he has 23 shots in his last 5 games, so not getting maybe the bounces, even though you say he has a high shooting percentage overall, but obviously not lately with no points in his last stretch of games. I think he'll be fine, but yeah, not the 70-point guy that maybe I was hoping for. Okay, let's end the show with some hot streaks. I was going to start with Columbus. We already covered them, so let's go to the other team on a huge winning streak, which is Minnesota. They have now won 10 in a row, and we already covered a few of their players last week, but I will mention, so Parise has been out with an illness the past couple of games, which allowed Jason Zucker to join the fun in the top 6, and he had 1 goal and 1 assist against Montreal on Thursday, and then 1 goal and 2 assists in the big 7-4 win against the Rangers on Thursday. So all of a sudden, I've been seeing him getting added by a ton of people in a ton of leagues, which makes sense when you have such a hot 2 games. He's up to 22 points in 33 games on the season now. And he's a guy who had stretches of relevance last year. So obviously, who knows what's going to happen when Parise comes back. But I wonder if Jason Zucker has earned a spot in the top 6. And I wonder if he's someone people should be looking to add. You know, if we add him to the conversation of the Letestus and the Spooners and all of that, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on where Zucker fits in there.
Well, first, I'd like to get an update on how Zach Parise is feeling. Elon, I have my IR filled in 3 different leagues, and I'm just waiting to make moves, and I can't do anything because I have no idea how long any of these guys are going to be out for. I guess that's a side rant. Jason Zucker, we know that the Minnesota top 6 is always fluid and moving, and it's kind of can be a top 9 as well. There's a lot of players who can succeed in a lot of different places. Jason Zucker is somebody who's, as long as he's up there for Parise, that's good news for me. He had a season high 6 shots on goal in that Montreal game. He followed that up with just 2 shots on goal against New York. But that's sort of what he does. When he gets an opportunity, he can fire a ton of shots on net and occasionally score on them. And occasionally score on them. I don't know if you remember, Elon, 2 years ago, he had 21 goals in 51 games, and we were lauding him because 20 of those goals came at even strength. Only 1 of them was on the power play. His goals per 60 was off the charts, and he does all this with not a lot of ice time too. So he maintains pretty good rate stats, and when he gets more ice, he's able to put more shots on net and get a couple more goals. I don't see him being in a big-time scoring role like this for a very long time, though, and that's why I wouldn't get overly excited about him. Good for as long as Parise's out.
Yeah, which might not even be 1 more game, right? It was an illness that they say he was out for, so maybe he'll be back after the break. One guy who I just want to bring up again, I guess we've done it a couple times this season, but Eric Stahl, he's up to 28 points in 33 games on the season, which is a 70-point pace. Charlie Coyle actually right behind him with 27 points. But I want to focus on Stahl. Like, is he back to being that guy? Like, it's not too long ago. I guess maybe it's like 3 years ago now. In 2012, 2013, Eric Stahl had 53 points in 48 games, which is a similar pace. And he had 70 points in a full season before that. Was it just that Carolina wasn't a good place for him? And I guess the Rangers, when he went there, obviously forget about that. He only had 6 points in 20 games when he got traded to the Rangers. But like, Eric Stahl's clearly having a resurgence. Is this sustainable? Like, is he just the good Eric Stahl that we remember, or has he just been riding unsustainable numbers at this point?
Let's stop to appreciate the streak that he's on right now. He's on a 7-game point streak. He has at least a point in 12 of his last 15 games played. And only recently did the power play points start coming. So he's doing a lot of that at even strength. He's getting at least a couple of shots on goal each game, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. And a few multi-point efforts too in the last couple of weeks. So really good things happening for Eric Stahl all season long. Elon, you asked about Carolina. Carolina is just not a place where scoring happens. Carolina is where scoring goes to die.
Yeah, and that's what you used to say about Minnesota all the time.
Well, sort of. It was a different sort of cap. Minnesota, we knew all the time that the sort of the way they built their lineup lended itself to a more defensive-minded system where it's a scoring by committee, 50-55 points for a few of them. Parise would stand out on top. In Carolina, it was like, well, they have a new coach, and they figured out their defense, and they have some guys on offense who can score, but they never, ever seem to get a chance to do anything. And New York didn't offer Eric Staal that opportunity either. We talked at length last year about how it was just the wrong place for him to end up. They did not appreciate him. They wanted to use him as a really depth third-line center. And I guess seeing how they managed their lineup this year, we have a little bit more insight into exactly what they had planned for him. But clearly he's capable of more than that with the season he's having so far. His personal shooting percentage is a little high, it's the highest it's been since the lockout shortened season back in 2012-13, and really the third highest he's had in the last 10 years. So that tells you that some regression should be coming there. On ice shooting percentage is a little high as well. But he is on a more involved and interesting power play, which helps. He has 7 power play points already. Actually, I guess, okay, he had 17 points on the power play last year in Carolina. No, sorry. A little more involved. He had 7 points all of last year between Carolina and New York. So that's a good sign for him. And I like the way he's playing a lot. We liked him as a comeback candidate. I'm glad it's coming to fruition. I think he deserved to have at least one more good year, so it's good to see him getting it so far. I think it's reasonably sustainable. Not 28 points in 33 games, but I could see him keeping this up enough to break 60 points. Oh, that's still so hard to say about a Minnesota player, but I want it for him. I want it to happen.
I mean, right now he's on a 70-point pace, like I said. So if he only puts up like a 50-point pace moving forward, you know, he should be able to crack 60 points. So it's definitely possible unless he totally flames out. And, you know, when you're on the top line and top power play on a team that's winning all the time, you're going to see some points. And it's really nice to see that Staal can even get points when Parise is injured. Though at the same time, I think that you're right that you could probably sell high on him if you can. If someone believes that he's a 70-point guy, if they think that they're trading for the Eric Staal from 5 years ago, maybe you can swap him for like a 70-point guy, because I see him more as a 60-point guy going forward. But I definitely think he's going to hit that 60 points. Also, Matt Dumba, since we're on Minnesota, he's found his way back on power play 1, bumping Spurgeon. I was excited about Spurgeon for a while and saying Dumba was kind of a snoozer off that top power play. He's back now. So maybe it's time to add him back if he was dropped. Like, we haven't talked about many defensemen this week, but recently we've talked about potential ads like Jake Gardner and Petrie and Brody. So I'd be curious to know if you think Matt Dumba is worth being in the conversation now again with these types of guys.
I don't know. He's someone who's had enough ups and downs and ebbs and flows in hype that I've started to sort of not pay attention to whenever good things are happening with him. But this seems sustained long enough, or at least to be somewhat interesting. Like if you're in a league where, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, like, I don't know. Like Anton Strawman is owned and Matt Dumba isn't, then Matt Dumba is definitely someone you should have on your roster. I think he's also a good guy to grab in for a spot start for as long as he's doing what he's doing now. Getting 2 shots a game for a defenseman isn't a bad gig, and also some power play time as well. I'm warming up to him for the first time in a while, especially, you know, I guess as Ryan Suter's ice time decreases, which it hasn't really yet in a significant way, but it will. He's getting older, and Matt Dumba is going to be groomed to be that next top guy. Although there's Jared Spurgeon, Scantella, Brodin. There's enough guys in Minnesota that it can be a defense by committee, but I suppose Dumba is the one after Ryan Suter who stands out the most. You always ask me about Jared Spurgeon too. I'm a little more hopeful about Dumba if he gets a sustained look in the right situations.
Yeah, I like Spurgeon. Like, he always seems like a decent fantasy ad, and I was really excited about him being on the top power play. I'm more down on him now. I own him in the cupful, but he's sort of been my cycle guy, especially with Chris Letang out. So I'll probably hold on to him at least for a couple of more games. Maybe when Letang is back, I'll have to let him go unless he get back on the top power play. He's not sustainably blocking. Like, that was the one thing about Spurgeon, that he used to get a lot of blocks. Doesn't seem to be doing it as much as that's been happening a lot with a few defensemen. Like, you know, John Karlsson comes to mind. Guys who you expected to give you a lot of blocks just aren't doing it. I wonder if the game has changed a bit for these blockers. Even Chris Russell, I think is leading the league in blocks or is up there, but he hasn't been getting like but he hasn't been getting like consistent 5-6 blocks per game like he was getting a couple seasons ago. So it's something interesting to look into. But okay, let's end the show, Brian, with a couple of goalies who we have to mention. We have to go to Calgary and bring up Brian Elliott again. So if you remember, last week I mentioned that Chad Johnson had 3 straight bad games, and maybe we should expect that Brian Elliott will get another chance, and they have that good game against Arizona on Monday. So that might be a good start to grab Elliott for as a spot start and see what happens. And like basically it was the best case scenario for anyone who added Brian Elliott. He got the start against Arizona. He stopped 25 of 27 shots for a 4-2 win. Then Chad Johnson got the Tuesday start against San Jose, which is a much harder matchup. And he again let in 4 goals, took a 4-2 loss. So, of course, Calgary went back to Elliott on Friday versus Vancouver, and he got a super easy game. They got a 4-1 win, and he only saw 14 shots against. So now, all of a sudden, Chad Johnson is riding 4 bad games in a row, while Brian Elliott has 2 wins in a row with good save percentages. So I'd imagine Elliott's going to get the start against Colorado tomorrow, which is another easy game. And then they play Anaheim on Thursday and Arizona Saturday. So it seems like Brian Elliott is a good guy to own right now, as he might get a couple of these easier games. I wonder if we're witnessing Elliott stealing the job back right now, or is this just kind of him getting lucky, getting easy games, while Chad Johnson gets all of the tougher assignments like San Jose, and as soon as the matchups start evening out, then we'll start to realize that Chad Johnson is still the better goalie.
You have every Brian Elliott owner knocking on wood right now after saying that Colorado's going to be an easy game. It should be. They're a mess offensively. But we'll see what happens when they play Calgary, who are not the soundest team in any way. And Brian Elliott still not assuredly a good goalie outside of St. Louis. But yes, there are some signs of life. You mentioned his 2 wins recently. Go back to his last start before that. It was a win. He stopped 25 of 27, albeit against the New York Islanders, but he had a .926 save percentage that game, .923 in his short relief appearance against Tampa, and then a .926 and a .929. Those are all good numbers to have in your game log. Meanwhile, you have, like you said, Chad Johnson, whose numbers in his game log have not been so good. I don't know. I'm still really trying to figure out if Brian Elliott can be a good goalie without Ken Hitchcock as a coach, without as deep a decor as St. Louis had. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I was way off about Chad Johnson, who sustained himself. I actually own the tandem now in one of my leagues, the league where I'm against you. So I don't know how this is all going to play out. I think, honestly, it's like we're starting from scratch. Both goalies have an equal opportunity of getting the number 1 job. We'll see where each one goes in the next, say, 3 starts each, and then reassess. I feel like this is going to be a topic for the next couple weeks.
Yeah, probably. But of course, people have to make decisions now. Like if Elliott is a free agent in your league, this might be your last chance to get him before, if he does go on a nice run and steals that starter job and does well, he's going to get added. So I'm curious, should people be adding Elliott ASAP? And also people who have Chad Johnson that maybe see other tempting goalies out there, or maybe they don't even need a 4th goalie. Like Brian, we have 4 goalies right now in our league that we're in together. And I had a Chad Johnson for a spot start at one point and then obviously couldn't drop him because he was doing so well. At some point, do Chad Johnson owners, like, I'm just curious, kind of like my question before about the guys like Alex Steen and how long do you wait on them? I'm curious to know, like, how long do you wait before you rush to grab Brian Elliott, and how long do you hold on to someone like Chad Johnson if he keeps letting in 4 goals every game?
Well, goalies are a super context-dependent thing, right? It depends on what other goalie options are out there, how important goalie categories are for you. I can tell you in the league where I own Chad Johnson, I went and got Brian Elliott. Mind you, in that league, my other goalies are Marc-Andre Fleury and Semyon Varlamov. So I am desperate to have an actual goalie on my team. So that made it even more necessary for me to get Elliott, to cuff Calgary and make sure I got those starts. That's essentially the only reason why. It's not because I'm confident he's going to start rattling off great start after great start. I just needed to protect myself, have an insurance option. So maybe he serves that for you, or you're desperate in a similar way to me, and you don't have Chad Johnson, but you have only 1 goalie who's getting starts for your team and you need more. In that case, Brian Elliott could be worth an ad.
Yeah, like I added him in the couple as my 3rd goalie behind Gibson and Rask. And like if he could turn out to be a solid 3rd goalie on my team as a starting goalie who gets decent numbers, I'll be happy, but I'm not banking on it. I would say my advice would be, if Elliott's available, it might be worth it to drop at least a forward or, you know, your bottom defenseman or whatever to have dibs on him and see how he does over the next couple of weeks. If you had Chad Johnson, I think you should still wait. Like I know it doesn't look good with Elliott doing well recently and him doing bad recently, but there is something to the fact that Elliott's gotten the easy easy games and Johnson's gotten the hard games. So I would like to see a few more games for each against similar competition. I'm sure the coach of Calgary feels the same way. Okay, Brian, you also mentioned to me that you wanted me to bring up Matthew Tkachuk this week. Cam brought him up in our bonus episode earlier this week, and I was surprised that he's up to 19 points in 32 games on the season. This has been a quietly successful year for Matthew Tkachuk. He's actually on a 3-game point streak right now, so I'm wondering if people should be looking to add him in one-year leagues, throw him into the conversation with the Ryan Spooners. Maybe Tkachuk is an available free agent for you as well, and actually you had Letestu and Pat Maroon ahead of Spooner. So now let's throw Matthew Tkachuk into that conversation. He's been playing with Backlund and Frolik, and he's off the top power play, so it's hard for me to get too excited about him, but at the same time, he's on like a 50-point pace and on a little run right now.
Yeah, I actually asked you to bring him up right before I listened to your interview with Cam, so you guys took care of it. I think I just wanted to make the point that he's doing better than you think. We talked about all these depth guys in this episode. He probably stands above them. He stands above Anthony Mantha to me. He stands above Ryan Spooner. He's up above a half-point per game pace. He had 5 shots in his most recent game, albeit against Vancouver, but it still counts, and they're in the same division, so they're going to play each other a bunch this year. Matthew Tkachuk, I think I'm just going to phrase it that way, doing better than you think, or doing better than you realize, perhaps.
Yeah, well, not anymore after 2 straight podcasts talking about him. I think if I had to pick a guy on Calgary who's not Gaudreau or Monahan, I might actually take Chris Versteeg, who's been hot and cold all year, but he's the one on the top power play. And of the guys we've talked about this week, I take Ryan Spooner. Again, like I said, I like the top power play. I don't know. I just feel like it's a better chance to score. If, all else equal, we think these guys are pretty similar. Give me the guy on the top power play. Bonus question, I guess, about Calgary. We got this question on Facebook, and I'm curious to know how you would answer it, because someone asked, how would you rank Giordano, Hamilton, and Brody? You don't like that?
I just, where's that coming from?
It's in the doc, man.
Is it?
Yeah.
I guess I skipped right past that part. I didn't notice it.
Okay. Let me finish. Okay. It's very concerning for Giordano owners that he hasn't been getting power play time lately. Like I mentioned recently, TJ Brody has been on the top power play, but I know you said that you don't think Brody is someone you could rely on, but I'm even curious, just Giordano and Hamilton. Like Giordano, I know that we're supposed to expect him to bounce back and do well like he did last year, but at the same time, like Dougie Hamilton is really showing himself to be a really solid player, taking so many shots on goal, so many more than Giordano. I guess Giordano gets more blocks and hits if your league counts that, but offensively, it has Dougie Hamilton usurped Giordano, and then also is Brody in the conversation as he's sticking on the top power play?
Brody is not in the conversation, so I'll just knock him out right off the top. Hamilton's got the shots. Giordano's got the blocks with upside for shots. His shot rates are definitely down so far this year. I'm still holding out hope that they'll recover. I'm not 100% sure that they will. So if you want to value shots on goal, Hamilton could be the better guy for you and could put up similar offensive numbers as he did for the last several months of last year. But Giordano, I still think he has the better upside, and he'll get you some crazy blocks some nights, and he can do not maybe as well as Hamilton in blocks, not as well as Hamilton in shots on goal, but close enough that it doesn't matter because he makes up for it in the points and the blocks categories.
Yeah, well, just to give the updated rankings in terms of straight up points, Dougie Hamilton has 20 points in 36 games, Giordano with 14. So right now, Dougie doesn't only give the shots, but he's also giving the points. He has, by the way, 104 shots versus Giordano's 73. So right now, I guess, of course, like you said, like with hits and blocks. Actually, no, Dougie Hamilton has more hits than Giordano. So it's really only the blocks that Giordano is beating Dougie Hamilton in now. So it's hard not to want Dougie Hamilton. And then, I agree with you that Brody, even on the top power play, I don't expect too much from him. But I do like him as a cycle guy right now while he's on the top power play with Gaudreau and Monahan and Chris Versteeg, like I said, and I guess Troy Brouwer to complete the set. But Dougie Hamilton also getting power play time. And I don't know, I'm starting to think maybe it's Hamilton time if you want a defenseman on Calgary. I might disagree with you. Okay.
Wait, hang on. I just want to butt in here because I've been one of the huge boosters of Dougie Hamilton over the last couple of years. And I don't want to be suddenly left out on the cold because I didn't put it. Suddenly left out in the cold because I suddenly ranked Giordano ahead of him. I still Love Dougie Hamilton. I think he can outperform Giordano. It's just a matter of who's going to get the most opportunity. And my guess is that it's going to be Giordano for at least the rest of this year. I think the torch needs to be passed to Hamilton. It's only a matter of time before it does. But that's essentially making my mind up about this decision. Whether Hamilton can be Giordano in the future, I think he can. I think he can put up more shots. I think he can get some pretty fantastic point totals. Anyway, I think I've made my point. I love Dougie Hamilton. I just want to make that clear.
Okay, it's good. Everyone, note it, mark it down. December 26th, Boxing Day 2016. Brian loves Dougie Hamilton. Okay, let's end the show. I was actually wanting to bring up one more goalie. We were just talking about Elliott and Johnson and that whole business. One place where there's absolutely no controversy in terms of who's the number one goalie is in Toronto. Frederik Andersen. Man, he's doing really well. We had a surprisingly tough question on our Facebook group recently. Someone asked Andersen versus Corey Schneider, and obviously the gut reaction should be, of course, Corey Schneider next. I got like 5 more questions to answer. I don't have time to even look this up, but you look up their numbers, and obviously both are trending in opposite directions right now. Andersen has had quality starts in 6 of his last 7, up to a .923 save percentage, even after that horrible start to the season. Like, keep in mind how bad Frederik Andersen was at the start of the year. He was like letting in like 4 or 5 goals a game, it seemed. And now he's up to a .923. So a huge bounce back. Meanwhile, Corey Schneider still struggling, but at the same time, he's Corey Schneider. Like, he's our reliable guy, but games keep happening and he keeps on blowing it for his owners. Brian, at this point, who would you rather have for the rest of the season?
This is a really tough question. I agree that it seemed really simple at first. It's like, oh, hold on for Schneider. Everything's going to be okay with him. But Frederik Andersen, you can't ignore him anymore. Since November 1st, but Frederik Andersen, you can't ignore how well he's been doing. Since November 1st, he's a .938 goalie, which is just out of that world. Which is just out of this world. Plus, he's got a contract that makes it unlikely for him to be swapped out for another goalie in the near future. If I had to choose right now, I might have
Brian,
to
can you say it
I don't
again?
know.
Brian, can you start from if I had to choose right now?
Yeah. If I had to choose right now, I'd want to say Schneider, but I really feel pulled by Andersen. He's on a better team that's on the upswing, especially if you're looking into the future, if you're in a keeper setup. Andersen is a couple years younger than Schneider, and the Leafs have more pieces in place to be a competitive team sooner, while the Devils, I think management has the right idea and knows how to build a competitive team, but I think there's still a few significant pieces away from being there. So if I'm looking for wins, I think Andersen has the edge. If I'm looking for saves, I think Andersen and Schneider are about equal. If I'm looking at save percentage, it's so hard with how well Andersen's been playing. I think I still need to give the edge to Schneider. I've got to cut him a little more slack than just saying, well, Frederik Andersen's been better for the last 15, 20 games or so. Schneider's been so good for the last few years. Something's changed in New Jersey with their defense. Well, it's the departure of Adam Larsson, and we've talked about it on the show in the last couple of weeks about how I think Schneider's struggles are linked to a New Jersey defense core that is a little thin and a little confused and isn't exactly sure what to do without one of their anchors this year. If they can recover in time, Corey Schneider's save percentage has to be better than Frederik Andersen, who I still expect to be about a league average goalie. It's a bonus for the Leafs if he's any better than that.
Okay, well, we'll have to see at the end of the season if you're going to reassess that, because Frederik Andersen, this is his first time having the starting gig role, like, for sure. And maybe he's showing that, and he had that bad start to the season, but maybe he's the type of goalie like Steve Mason, and you just haven't had the opportunity to see it yet, that if he gets a number of starts in a row, maybe he can't get on a roll. We just don't know. He's never had this role. He was always in tandems in Anaheim with Gibson or with, I think, someone else before. I don't even recall. This is a really tough one for me. I'm also going to say Schneider for now, but I think it's like very close to 50-50. I feel like if you have Frederik Andersen and the Schneider owner wants to make a swap with you, I think you could be like, give me more, like give me a sweetener at this point, just because of how bad Schneider has been doing. So that makes it a little easier. If you get Schneider and maybe a defense upgrade for Andersen, that might make it more worthwhile to take that risk for the higher upside. Brian, that's all I've got for this week's show. Do you have any last players you wanted to bring up before we call it a night?
No, I told you about all of them before the show.
All right, perfect. So thank you, everyone, for joining us live on your holiday weekend or long weekend or whatever you want to call it. This has been a lot of fun. We really appreciate you joining us, and also for everyone listening. If you liked the show, tweet at us. Let us know. We'd like some end of the year feedback. So at Keeping Karlsson, let us know what you like, what you don't like. We're always looking to improve the format and keep this the best fantasy hockey website out there. Hosted by two guys who own Eric Karlsson in their keeper pools.
You said the best fantasy hockey website out there.
Oh,
I think you can probably start from and keep this and then pause and then say the best.
Okay. And keep this the best fantasy hockey podcast out there, hosted by two guys who own Eric Karlsson in their keeper pools. Of course, I don't want to be too braggy. Also, if you would be so kind as to go on iTunes, give us a 5-star review. That would be a very nice holiday present for us. Hey, you could even be extra generous. Go to keepingkarlsson.com/patron and consider becoming a patron of Keeping Karlsson. For only $5 a month, you really help out the show. And we give you some perks like joining the Keeping Karlsson patron-only Facebook group, which we brought up a bunch of times throughout the show. Not because I'm trying to promote it, but just because that's a big part of my life is on this Facebook group, talking to all the amazing patrons. Also, we do a patron cast once a month where the patrons basically decide what we're going to talk about. They ask us questions, and we just keep going all the way until we've answered all of their questions. And we actually have a patron cast this Wednesday. In 2 days, we're going to be having this month's patron cast. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and it's not too late for you to become a patron and join in on that fun. So again, keepingkarlsson.com/patron. But with that, let's cue the outro music. And Brian,
before we do, Elon, scheduling note, there will be no episode this upcoming Sunday.
Oh.
Right?
Yes, that's true. Okay, so one sec.
The next regular...
No, here, I'll say it.
Okay.
I said cue the outro music. You said scheduling note. Okay, I've cut the music. That's true. I should mention some scheduling notes. Like I said, Patreon is on Wednesday for the patrons. No show next week. Brian and I are taking a bit of a vacation, and then we'll be back with our regularly scheduled episodes every Sunday, starting on
January 8th.
January 8th. So there it is. You go to keepingkarlsson.com/live on January 8th at 8 p.m. EST to join us for our next regular episode. But with that, let's once again cue the outro music. And Brian, why don't you go ahead and read us the credits?
I will. Very soon. They're coming. Okay. This episode of the Keeping Karlsson Fantasy Hockey Podcast was presented by Dauber Hockey and supported by our patrons. It was researched with help from Dauber Hockey, Dauber Prospects, Frozen Pool, Corsica.hockey, Hockey Analysis, Hockey Reference, Hockey Database, Elite Prospects, CopperandBlue.com, Roto World, and Fantrax.
Great job as always, Brian. Good luck to all of you in 2017. Happy New Year. And we'll talk to you all, the patrons, in a couple days, and the rest of you in a couple weeks.
Until then, keep on keeping Karlsson, and Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah. Happy New Year. Let's hope for Alex Steen to have a nice, relaxing Happy New Year and maybe stop being so stinky. I'm not going to put that in the show. That's just for the people joining us live. Right. What is it? Josh gives us the nice enjoy the vacation. You're like, we'll still be around Twitter and Facebook. That is a vacation for me. That's my vacation from work. Whenever I want to take a break, I go on Facebook and Twitter. It's that's my fun.
Your mini vacations.
Yeah, I get lots of mini vacations throughout the day.
Lots of vacation time.
That I hope my boss doesn't find out about.
Does your boss know you have a podcast?
Oh, yeah. We once had
hasn't looked into the time investment required to maintain.
I mean, I get my stuff done. I
get your work done.
I told you the story that we had a job interview. Someone applied to be a developer.
You did.
And he recognized my voice from the podcast,
which is probably your name.
No, he recognized my voice. He didn't recognize my name, or maybe he did. And then, but he was at the end of the interview, he was like, "Okay, can I ask you just one question? You sound very familiar. Do you have a hockey podcast?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I really liked him, and we offered him the job. Not only because, by the way, he's a fan of the podcast, but then he didn't accept it. He could have had free. He could have had free fantasy advice every day. I was so excited to have someone to bounce ideas off of at work.
That's the shortcut route to becoming a patron. You just work at the same place as Elon, and you get all the benefits of a patron in person.
Here, actually, yeah, here it is right now. If you want to
Oh my God.
Financeit is hiring developers. So if anyone here, I think they're hiring other positions too. Check out financeit.ca. Check out the careers section.
Wow. This is great. That's great content. That should be on the show.
Well, I don't know.
Would your company sponsor the show?
I don't know.
They're looking for developers. We could put the job posting.
I don't know if like companies sponsor podcasts in order to recruit. Like I feel like usually it's companies trying to sell products. If we could have an offer code. But
you should consider it.
Well, I mean, I'll do it for free. I get a bonus. I think I get like a few $100s or something if someone,
Wow.
if I recruit someone who gets the job. I don't even know how much it is.
So that's why you've always tried to get me there.
No, you're just my friend. I don't.
No, that's what you told me.
I'd give you my bonus. For you, I'd give you that signing bonus, whatever it's called.
Wow, that's very generous.
I got a big edit tonight because you decided to go off book for half the show.
Yeah.
Please, enjoy your vacation and get back on track with your proper preparation.
Yeah, I'll do what I can. I'll do it.
Okay.
I got to get in the zone.
All right. Well, see you. I guess you have lots of options for episode titles, so have fun with that.
I don't know what they are, but I'll try and figure it out.
Something stinky.
Yeah.
Ebbs and flows. Okay, that's probably been done to death. All right. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.